In the deep wilderness of Montana, where the whispers of the trees echo stories of the past and rivers glisten under the morning sun, a moment unfolded that would bind two lives in an extraordinary way. A moment so rare, it could only be described as fate. Jack Harper was a man of the wild, a solitary soul who had spent most of his years living in a cabin tucked deep in the forest. A man who sought solace in the rustle of leaves and the crackling of campfires. Jack had chosen this life to escape the chaos of the outside world. But even he couldn't have foreseen what awaited him on that fateful day. As Jack hiked through a familiar trail, his boots crunching on the frost-covered ground, he heard something unusual. A faint cry, a sound so fragile, it barely pierced the crisp morning air. His heart quickened. Could it be an injured animal? A bird perhaps? Or something else entirely? Following the sound, Jack found himself in a small clearing. There, beneath a tangle of fallen branches, lay a tiny bear cub, its eyes barely open, its chest rising and falling with labored breaths. The sight was heartbreaking. Its fur was caked in mud, its body trembling in the cold. The cub looked more dead than alive. Jack crouched down, his rugged hands gently brushing the debris away. The cub's mother was nowhere to be seen. The air was thick with the scent of pine and damp earth, and a distant rustling hinted at the forest's ever-present life. Yet here, in this quiet corner, death seemed to linger. The cub's fragile body bore faint claw marks, perhaps from a predator, or the tragic result of a mother desperately trying to defend her young. Jack's heart tightened as he assessed the situation. His survival instincts kicked in. Years of living in these unforgiving woods had taught him the harsh realities of nature. Wild animals, even in their most vulnerable state, were not to be meddled with. Jack knew the unspoken rules of the wilderness. Nature had its own way of sorting things out, and humans were rarely part of that equation. Yet as the cub let out a weak whimper, something deep within him stirred. Compassion, often buried under the weight of isolation and self-reliance, broke through his steely resolve. Jack hesitated for a moment, scanning the surrounding woods. He hoped, perhaps irrationally, that the mother bear might emerge from the shadows, alive and well, to reclaim her cub. But the forest remained silent, save for the faint rustle of leaves in the breeze. The realization hit Jack hard. The cub was truly alone. Gingerly, he reached out and touched the cub's head. Its fur, damp and matted, was softer than he'd expected. The cub didn't flinch. It was too weak to resist. Jack's mind raced. If he left it here, death was certain. A predator, the cold, or simple starvation would claim it before the sun set. Taking it meant crossing an invisible line, risking his own safety and the delicate balance of the ecosystem. Yet his heart refused to let him walk away. He made his decision in an instant, as if some unseen force had guided his hand. Cradling the fragile creature in his arms, Jack lifted it from the ground. It let out a faint cry, a sound that cut through the stillness of the forest like a plea for help. Jack's weathered face softened as he held the cub closer, feeling its faint heartbeat against his chest. The journey back to the cabin was grueling. The uneven trail, slick with mud from recent rain, tested Jack's balance with every step. The cub, though small, grew heavier in his arms as fatigue set in. Jack's boots dug into the earth, his muscles straining under the combined weight of the cub and his pack. His breaths came in short bursts, the cold air burning his lungs. But he pressed on, driven by a determination he couldn't fully explain. The forest, usually a place of solitude and peace for Jack, seemed to close in around him. Shadows stretched long across the path as the sun dipped lower in the sky. Every rustle of leaves or snap of a twig set his nerves on edge. He was acutely aware of the dangers lurking in the woods, wolves, cougars, or even the mother bear, if she were still alive. Jack's grip on the cub tightened as his eyes darted to every movement, his senses heightened by the responsibility of the floor, its tiny body looking even more fragile under the soft glow of the lantern. Jack knelt beside the cub, his hands trembling slightly as he examined its injuries. Small cuts and scratches marred its fur, and its breathing remained shallow. He fetched a bowl of warm water and began cleaning the wounds with a piece of cloth. The cub flinched at first, its eyes fluttering open for a brief moment before closing again. Jack spoke softly, his deep voice carrying a gentleness rarely heard. "It's okay, little one. You're safe now." The hours that followed were a blur of careful tending. Jack prepared a mixture of goat's milk and water, using an old syringe to feed the cub. It was a slow process, each tiny sip a triumph. He wrapped the cub in a dry towel, placing it near the fireplace to keep it warm. As the fire crackled and cast dancing shadows on the walls, Jack sat back in his chair, exhaustion settling over him. Yet despite the physical toll, he felt a sense of purpose he hadn't experienced in years. That night, as the storm outside raged on, Jack kept a vigil by the cub's side. He knew the road ahead would be long and uncertain, but for now, the little bear had a chance Jack was willing to fight for, no matter the cost. Inside the cabin, Jack created a makeshift bed near the fireplace. He warmed milk and fed the cub drop by drop, staying by its side through the night. The warmth of the fire, the crackling of the logs, and the soft rhythmic sound of Jack's breath created a peaceful cocoon, wrapping them both in a sense of safety. The cub, now resting more comfortably, began to show small signs of life. Its tiny paws twitching in its sleep, its breath becoming steadier. As Jack looked down at the fragile creature, he couldn't help but feel a bond growing between them. He named the cub Shadow, a name inspired by the way the tiny creature followed his every movement with its curious, glistening eyes. It was as though the bear already knew it was meant to be by Jack's side. The name seemed fitting for the bond that had already formed. Shadow was his constant companion, even when Jack was unaware of it. Days turned into weeks and weeks into months. The cabin, once a place of isolation, had now become a home filled with life and purpose. Shadow began to heal. His body grew stronger with each passing day, his fur becoming shinier and more vibrant, his eyes sharper and more alert. Jack noticed solitude that had once been comforting now seemed incomplete without the cub by his side. The loneliness that had once clouded Jack's thoughts was replaced with a companion who gave him something to care for, something to love, something to protect. It wasn't just the survival lessons Jack was teaching. It was a bond deeper than anything Jack had ever experienced. Shadow wasn't just a wild animal. He was family. There was a shared understanding between them, a silent communication that transcended words. Whether they were walking through the forest or resting in front of the fire at night, Jack could feel the connection between them growing stronger each day. Shadow's growing presence, his movements, his protective nature, each spoke volumes about how far they had come together. There was no barrier between them. It was as if they were two souls intertwined, drawn together by something neither of them could explain. As time went on, Jack noticed subtle changes in Shadow. The cub was no longer the tiny, fragile creature he had found on that fateful day. The playful energy of a baby bear was now replaced by a strength and power that couldn't be ignored. The once skinny cub had filled out into a muscular young bear, his claws sharper, his instincts keener. His playful nips and gentle swats had become more powerful, and the way he moved through the forest was like poetry, fluid, confident, and entirely wild. Jack watched with a mixture of pride and heartache as Shadow's transformation took shape. The bond they shared was undeniable, but so was the reality that Shadow's heart belonged to the wild. Jack knew the day would come when he would have to let him go. It was the hardest decision of his life, but deep down, Jack knew it was the right thing to do. The forest was calling to Shadow, its primal pull growing stronger each day. As much as Jack wanted to keep Shadow by his side forever, he understood that the bear had a life of his own, a life that needed to be lived outside the confines of the cabin. The days grew shorter, and autumn arrived, casting its golden light over the wilderness. Jack and Shadow spent their final days together, making the most of every moment. They hiked to their favorite spots in the woods, swam in the cold mountain streams, and lay beneath the stars at night, side by side, as Jack whispered tales of the world outside the forest. Then, one crisp morning, as the first frost of the season glittered on the ground, Jack took a deep breath. It was time. He led Shadow deep into the forest, past the familiar trails, and into the heart of the wilderness. His eyes filled with tears, but he knew there was no other choice. He couldn't keep Shadow from his true calling. "Go on, Shadow," Jack whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "You're meant for this?" Shadow turned to face him, his intelligent eyes locking with Jack's. For a long moment, the two stood there, an unspoken understanding passing between them. Then, without a word, Shadow took a step back, his massive paws pressing into the earth as he began to disappear. Experience left a mark on his soul. He often revisited the spot where Shadow had saved him, leaving behind small tokens of gratitude: a fish, a bundle of berries, a simple carved wooden bear. Though he never saw Shadow again, he felt his presence in every rustle of leaves and every whisper of the wind. This story isn't just about a man and a bear. It's about the unbreakable bonds we can form with the world around us. It's about kindness, loyalty, and the incredible ways those acts can come full circle. Shadow didn't just save Jack's life. He reminded him, and all of us, of the profound connections that exist between humans and nature. It's a story that proves that even the smallest act of compassion can ripple into something extraordinary. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever experienced an unbreakable bond like this? Until next time, remember to be kind, stay curious, and cherish the world around you.